The Genesis Apologetics channel has divided their propaganda into three groups, targeting young children, high schoolers, and college kids. The previous episode was an introduction to the series of videos designed to indoctrinate children from kindergarten through middle school. I'm not going to cover every video in that series, there's too much. Nor will I bother with everything said in any one of them, because a lot of it is irrelevant or redundant, meaning that the same topic will come up again in greater detail later on, so I'll address it then. Right now, I'll just do a few samples or compilations of these before moving out of the children's zone and onto how they're misdirecting high school and college students.
Well, hello and welcome to The Zone. I'm your host, Big Wave Dave.
Cowabunga, dude.
So we're back with a brand new look and an exciting new season. Today we're going to talk about science. So let's start with the definition. So I found a lot of different definitions out there, but I really like this one. Science is the search for the truth, the effort to study the world around us.
That sounds all right at first, except that most academic sources define science as a process of acquiring and testing knowledge, where all postulations must be based on indicative evidence, empirical evidence, and where all claims must be verifiable and submitted to peer review, where any expert who wants to might check your work, find a flaw in it, and refute it, invalidating not only your conclusions but your reputation too. And they do this because accuracy and accountability are paramount in science, where neither of those things even matter at all in religion. A clergyman can say whatever he wants and always be wrong about everything. And that might not even matter to the believers, but being wrong once as a scientist could ruin your career. So you'd better be careful that whatever you've published is defensibly true, that we can all show that it is true regardless what anyone would rather believe. Knowledge differs from mere belief in the sense that in science, knowledge is testable, demonstrable, and thus justified, being factual information that can be verified objectively. While religion is all about asserting baseless speculation as if it were a matter of fact, science considers that dishonest, holding that if you can't show it, then you don't know it. So don't say it's true unless you can show that it is. And there are many things that may be true, but that we don't yet know whether they are, and so we can't honestly say that they are until we do know. And thus, we can't say whether something is the truth until we can show the truth of it. It doesn't matter how strongly you believe it, belief doesn't equal knowledge. And claiming something to be the truth when it is not evidently true, or pretending to know things no one even can know, is called lying. Yet, that's what all religions do. Cowabunga Dave's definition of science allows one to bypass all those criteria of facts, epistemology, and methodology to simply assume and assert whatever fantasy they like, as though that was the truth, even without any means of backing that up. That's why these other criteria must be included. Scientists prefer to search for knowledge rather than truth, for the reason that, ironically, those who claim truth instead are usually lying. Every liar declares that whatever they're selling is the absolute truth with a capital T. But if you noticed that those who include the word truth in their alias on social media also rely on deceptively misquoted, misrepresented, or otherwise blatantly false claims? If they use truth in their name, then they don't use truth in their arguments, and vice versa. And those who believe in and defend egregious and baseless and already falsified conspiracy theories and other deceitful propaganda typically identify as truthers, and every so-called truther relies on lies. Notice how often those who say that they're searching for the truth are really trying to promote a particular lie as the truth, accepting only whatever they think aligns with that, whether that evidence is real or not. They don't check it, and they don't actually search for truth either. Instead, they avoid every actual truth or contradiction that stands against them, often by dodging or deflecting tough questions.
Then you are a king. It's you that say I am. I look for truth and find that I get damned.
Well, what is truth? Is truth unchanging law? We both have truths. Are mine the same as yours?
We don't have different truths. You can't say that it's true for me, because you don't get your own set of alternative facts to support your alternative reality. We both share the same reality and the same facts. Thus, if it's true for you, then it has to be true for me too. And if it's not true for me, then it's not true for you either. So it's not enough just to define science, because we also have to define knowledge and or truth as well. I think the truth is what the facts are, what we can show to be true, not whatever else we might assume or imagine beyond or instead of that. So if you can't show the truth of it, you should honestly admit that there is no truth to it.
So if we're going to talk science, we need to learn about some of the terms.
You're new at this, aren't you? You just Googled this yesterday, didn't you? That's why you don't have any academic definitions. You're just quoting out of Webster's dictionary.
The first one is hypothesis. Now, what is that? A hypothesis is an idea that we want to test to see if it's true. For example, I think there might be air in this room. So we could do experiments to prove if that's true or not.
Well, you're still breathing, so maybe at least there's oxygen, which Antoine Laurent Lavoisier hypothesized in 1783. But you can't prove that there's oxygen. And the reason that you can't is because the definition you got from the dictionary is fine, except for that science has a rule that you can never prove a hypothesis to be true. In that sense, oxygen can technically never be proven, even though we all know that it's real. At most, maybe you could disprove a hypothesis. Otherwise, all you can do is show whether your hypothesis is supported, meaning that it might be true, or that it is not supported. And in science, anything that is unsupported is effectively wrong.
Now, the second one, a lot of people get confused about this. When scientists call something a theory, it's an idea that has been supported through research. And it's generally accepted to be true until it's proven not to be.
To be fair, the criteria to qualify as a scientific theory is high enough now that no theory in science has been disproved in more than a century. Lavoisier's oxygen theory disproved and replaced Stahl's theory of phlogiston, but that was hundreds of years ago. Otherwise, there's another dictionary definition that is fairly adequate, though because it isn't a scientific source, then it didn't mention the importance of a theory also being able to make predictions based on prior knowledge, which is how we continue to test theories.
Now, one bit of caution about this. Some things are called theories that really shouldn't be.
If you're talking about string theory, that's because mathematics theories don't have such strict criteria as scientific theories do.
We're going to talk about that next month when we talk about evolution.
You made this video in August, and it's now November. But that other video about evolution still isn't here. Otherwise, the video I'm making now would be addressing and correcting that one instead. And what a surprise that evolution would be your one exception to what is a valid scientific theory. Of course, you're wrong about that, as evolution is the only explanation of biodiversity, scientific or otherwise. It has profound predictive and explanative power, and it has been substantiated conclusively, constantly, and consistently, continuously, without contradiction or exception. So it meets all of your criteria in spades. Therefore, you have no justification in pretending that evolution isn't a valid scientific theory, especially since the National Academy of Science says that evolution is the foundation of modern biology. But no. Cowabunga Dave here, whose education is limited to what he found in a common dictionary yesterday, pretends that he knows better than all the experts who have studied this all their lives.
And finally, there is what's called scientific law. Now, these are things found to be always true. For example, the law of gravitation.
That's a bad example for two reasons. One, because Newton's law of gravitation is interchangeably referred to as the theory of gravity, and two, it wasn't perfect. There are things it couldn't account for, so it wasn't always true, and it had to be superseded by Einstein's theory of relativity. Relativity may need a supplement too.
If you jump out of an airplane like these guys, you better have a parachute or you're going to learn all about gravity.
We still don't know all about gravity. That's one of the reasons we have super colliders, because physicists are still trying to understand what gravity is and how it works. Evolution, however, is already well understood, and it's one of the best supported theories in all of science, literally even better supported than the theory of gravity.
So scientists, when they're doing research, they use something called the scientific process. Here's how it works. First, they come up with the idea or the hypothesis that they want to test. The second thing they do is conduct research and or experiments to find out if the idea is true. And then finally, they will either refine, accept, or reject that idea. Now, in reality, this step often repeats. Scientists will test something and refine the hypothesis. They'll test it again, refine it, and so on and so forth. This is especially true when we're talking about creating new technologies. So there are two different types of science. The first type is observational or operational science. Now, have you ever done an experiment like this? Then you have done observational science. You see, observational science deals with the present, the here and now. It involves doing tests that we can repeat and get the same results over and over again.
We can do that with evolution too, and we do, and we have throughout the entire history and industry of agriculture. You'll probably dismiss that as only microevolution, but we can do that with macroevolution too. Like when a new species of bacteria evolved that was able to hydrolyze nylon, a substance that was invented in 1935 and was until then completely alien to our biosphere. Geneticists were able to identify the origin of this new ability as a frameshift mutation. They could show exactly how it happened and how it works. Answers in Genesis is one of the religious extremist propaganda factories with which Genesis Apologetics is partnered. And they hired biased scientists to try to come up with some excuse, any excuse, to pretend that it wasn't really a mutation, that it wasn't really natural selection, or that it wasn't new information, or that it wasn't random chance, because they're forbidden to admit any of that. It's so sad when your religion pretends to be all about truth, but it can't admit the truth because y'all have to make believe something else instead. Then when another bacterial species evolved that was able to consume and break down polyethylene bottles, researchers again identified the type and location of that mutation. And their experiments to prove that accidentally tweaked it such that the organism became 6 times more efficient, improving an already beneficial mutation with repeatable experimental observations in the lab.
So the first type of science is observational science. The second type is historical science. So historical science is where we dig up old things like this dinosaur fossil, and we come up with theories about these.
A moment ago, it seemed as if Cowabunga Dave understood that a theory is the highest level of confidence that science can achieve, that a scientific theory isn't just an idea, but a body of knowledge explaining certain phenomena, and it includes hypotheses, facts, and natural laws pertaining to that field of study. Yet, here he implies that a theory is no more than a guess, based only on speculation. He does that because religion is all about pretending to know what you don't. That means he has to pretend that scientists don't know what they do. It's a tu quoque fallacy of projection and juxtaposition, where he says that the scientists are the ones who are speculating, not him, as if he's the one who knows things, not them.
Now what's interesting is we can weigh this or measure this fossil and things like that. But you know what I can't tell you? Where this fossil came from, because we weren't there when it was created.
I can tell you exactly where this fossil came from, because I had to log a GPS reading of its location when I found it on a paleontological expedition into the South African Karoo. It's a portion of a skull cap with features consistent with Permian therapsids. Those are, or rather were, transitional forms that look like they're partway between reptiles and mammals. Most of them lived in the Permian period before the dinosaurs. The area where I found this was radiometrically dated by ash falls nearby to be just over 263 million years old. So I can tell you where and when it came from, too. I can almost tell you what it came from. I found several bones for these, all Permian species, of course, because we were on a Permian exposure, but this was the only crania. If it had teeth or maybe a jaw, then it would have been diagnostic, and I might have had the honor of naming a new species. But I still have enough to identify a larger taxonomic grouping. This is no reptile, nor is it a para-reptile such as used to exist back then when everything was a transitional species. No, this was definitely a therapsid, a not yet mammal, an animal that blurs the distinction between mammals and reptiles. Its existence is a fact that is positively indicative of evolution, and creationism can't account for it or its extinction.
So that's why historical science can be so subjective.
There is nothing subjective about the diagnostic characteristics of this animal. It's not merely an opinion that it has a pineal foramen. It's there. You can see it. I was with a team of paleontologists and geologists, some of whom did their own radiometric dating with several different isotopes, correlating and confirming an absolute date for the strata. Those are all objectively verifiable facts, indisputable, except when your religion demands that you deny reality in whole or in part as necessary to preserve your favored fantasy.
In fact, the worldview, what the scientist believes about the Bible and about God, really has a big impact on how they interpret fossils like this one.
It shouldn't, except when we allow religious biases to interfere. If you found that bone, got GPS readings and a geological analysis of the strata where you found it, associated with a volcanic intrusion or ash layer, then if you date the igneous rocks with potassium argon, and then again with rubidium strontium, and then again with uranium lead, and they all return the same narrow window of age, then you could accept that it is however many millions of years old as the data indicates. But if you have faith in a dogmatic, science-denying cult like young Earth creationism, then you simply can't accept any truth that stands against your preferred delusion.
People can look at fossils like this and come up with completely different ideas about what the creature was. Let's play a game. This is called Who Am I? Are you ready? So, what animal does this skull belong to? Is it an alien, an armadillo, a dog, a wombat, or something else? You ready? Shout out your answer. It's a wombat. Isn't he cute? All right, what about this one? Is that a rhinoceros, a buffalo, a warthog, a bulldog, or none of the above? If you said bulldog, you're right. Wow, she is so cute. How about this one? Is that a gorilla, a chihuahua, a panda bear, or a monkey? Shout out your answer. That is a panda bear. This is one of my favorites. What animal does this skull belong to? Is it a saber-toothed tiger, a woolly mammoth, a bison, or a Chinese water deer? You ready? Yell it out. Believe it or not, that skull belongs to a Chinese water deer. Here's a closer look at that critter. So cool. All right, last one. What does this skeleton belong to? Is that an alligator, a platypus, a weasel, or something else? Believe it or not, that is a platypus. Now the platypus is such an amazing animal. It's got so many different types of features. It's got a soft bill and webbed feet like a duck. It's got claws. The females lay eggs like a snake, but they feed their young milk. And the males have poison spikes on the back of their leg. Now some people might think, oh, this is the mother of all creatures or something like that. Nah, this is just a really cool creature that God made.
It's not a creature at all because it wasn't created. Instead, it's one of only two surviving genera that were once the standard among mammals, that they all laid eggs until the emergence of therians in the late Jurassic. All modern mammals are either eutherians or metatherians, except for two genus of monotremes. But there used to be a whole lot more whole groups of Mesozoic mammals that were all egg layers. Another fact that creationism can't even admit, much less account for.
But if we didn't have the platypus today, we wouldn't know much about it. Here's the point. You know, because we have these creatures, we know a lot about them. But if we were looking at the remains of something that no longer exists, we may make a lot of incorrect guesses about them. You get it?
Well, you've certainly made a few incorrect guesses about your doctrine and mythology. But science isn't the guesswork that you imagine it to be. I got the right answer on every skull you showed, in most cases even before you listed the options. I didn't recognize the wombat at first, gotta be honest. I couldn't tell that one until you listed the other options because I already knew all of them. And you should know that there are plenty of marsupials and other non-marsupial metatherians identified in the fossil record from lineages with no surviving members today. Yet even though we've never seen them alive, we can classify them due to subtle distinctions in their skeletons, particularly their skulls and teeth. The Chinese water deer is obviously the skull of an artiodactyl, and an herbivorous one despite its fangs. There were artiodactyls in the fossil record that ate meat, and we can tell that by their skulls too, and by the type of teeth that they had, and also by chemical traces in some fossils that tell you precisely what kind of food it ate. And look at this one. Your possible answers included gorilla and monkey. Both primates. Well, there are a few species of gorilla and many different species of monkey, including gorillas, and humans too. But we know that this can't be a primate because primates have fully enclosed optical orbits. The zygomatic arch and the orbital process are consistent with carnivorans. There are a couple of mongooses with enclosed optical orbits, but the development of that trait represents another evolutionary transition. The other two options, a panda and a chihuahua, are both carnivorans, which you can tell that this is by the fact that it has shearing carnassials rather than molars. I knew it had to be the panda because I'm already familiar with the skull of the Chihuahua and Bulldog and other dog breeds, which I compare to the skulls of wolves in my explanations of evolution, since these are all closely related. Funny that you would accept these as all being the same species, but you insist that these have to be completely unrelated because they differ only slightly. We can identify even unfamiliar carnivorans in the fossil record too, and contrast them against similar forms that no longer exist, like mesonychids or creodonts, closely related clades that were carnivorous, but just outside of carnivora. It's just a matter of knowing some anatomy.
Great, let's move on. The important thing to remember is that observational science and historical science are not the same thing.
Yes, they are. Philosophers of science Michael Weisberg of the University of Pennsylvania and Elliot Sober of the University of Wisconsin-Madison agree that while scientists can distinguish historical and nomothetic science, the differences are not fundamental. All science shares the same basic methodology of observations that can be tested and verified both by research and experiment in either case. And these applications share considerable overlap in that observable science offers no guarantees, while historical science can be quite reliable. And some of the same applications transcend the so-called division between empirical and forensic, as scientists can alternate between them and in some cases use both to investigate the same question. But of course, the religious apologist wants to discredit whatever aspect of science they think pertains to evolution, because they can't admit demonstrable facts or the truth of the matter. If you accept science, you accept evolution. And if you reject evolution, then you reject a significant portion of science too.
So, question, should we always trust scientists? Well, frankly, no. And here's why. Scientists are people, and people make mistakes.
Well, Cowabunga Dave, you might be surprised to find out that the Quran, the Zenda Avesta, the Bhagavad Gita, the Adi Granth of the Sikhs, and every single book of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament were all written by people, which is why every one of those compilations includes so many mistakes. And more importantly, the clergy, all of them are people. And so is every religious apologist like yourself.
I know I make a lot of mistakes.
Because you don't know what you're talking about, nor do you want to. Nor do you want anyone else to understand any of this either. Yes, when we're talking about matters of science, we'll always be better off trusting the experts because they're usually right, at least regarding their field of study. Now, can we ever trust religious apologists? No, never, especially not on anything related to their field, because they've never been right once yet.
And then here's another important thing. Some scientists don't believe in God. So when they're dealing with historical science, they come up with some pretty interesting ideas.
So you're saying that scientists who do believe in God don't have any interesting ideas? And more importantly, what about the scientists who believe in God and accept evolution because they can demonstrate its validity on demand, where creationists worship a book instead of a God and have never conjured a single argument that was both verifiably true and indicative of their position? Ever.
For example, when they look at this old fossil, somebody who doesn't believe in God will think that that's an ape man. Or somebody who trusts God and believes God's word will look at the same bones and say, nope, that's just an extinct ape.
Because only one of these people is looking at the evidence at all, understanding the many features in these bones that show that it really did walk upright. The other person doesn't understand any of that and doesn't want to. That person is ignoring the evidence entirely, preferring to remain willfully ignorant in order to make believe in a fairy tale instead. Evidence be damned. And more importantly, your illustrations have these books labeled wrong. Science is not man's word. Science is all the objective facts of the natural world, from geostratigraphy, taxonomy, the genome, radioisotopes, and so on. Things men couldn't have put there. If there is a God, then God could have put those there. If so, then science is God's word, not man's. We couldn't have planted those fossils, nor could we have arranged ERVs in DNA, or nor done any of the rest of that either. However, what we can do is make up and write down tall tales. We know how to tell stories. Whoppers, in fact. Even professional theologians acknowledge that every book of the Bible was written, rewritten, edited, translated, interpolated, and interpreted by mere fallible men. That makes the Bible man's word, not God's.
So it's interesting that the Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge.
It is interesting how the relationship Christians imagine that they have with their God is so abusive. We could discuss what a contradiction it is to both fear God and pretend that He loves us. But when you bring up the Bible, then I not only have to correct your science, but I also have to correct your mythology and theology too. Better to stay on topic.
So when we try to look into the past and figure things out and we discount God, we go down the wrong path.
You got that backwards too. When we look at the facts and actually acknowledge those facts, then we can weigh all of that evidence from all those fields of study against a compilation of short stories that have been largely disproved and discarded even by leading theologians. Then we realize that ignoring reality in order to believe in these fables anyway is the wrong path. So you should accept the truth instead.
Ape men were not real.
God is not real. But these fossil transitions are, and we can prove that, and you shouldn't be misinforming children otherwise. Now, the word ape man makes no sense because humans are apes. Therefore, all men are ape men, but you wouldn't understand that. So I think you're referring to every species besides humans in the taxonomic tree Hominini. That's both Ardipithecines, all the Australopithecines, Paranthropines, Kenyanthropus, etc., all of them. In which case, of course, they're all real. You've got the skeleton of one of them behind you.
Look at the bones!
And there are a whole lot more remains besides that to prove it. I've seen them myself. Yes, they're all extinct apes, but we will eventually be extinct apes too. But they were also hominins, like us. Those bones are real. They're not made of plastic, and they're not chimpanzees either. We know precisely what they are, and you are not allowed to admit that.
And just in case you missed it, I hope you check out our video on ape men, fact or fiction.
Oh, I will. That'll be the next episode.